The Monolith, the Stereolith. Previously, I made a video talking about a mystery in Space Engineers that hadn't been solved for over 8 years. And now, a year later, and a bit, we have finally found a solution. So sit back, relax, and grab a Scooby snack as we finally solve the mystery of the Stereolith. So, what is the Stereolith? In order to understand that, we first need to make a trip to Mars. Mars's largest mountain in real life and in Space Engineers is called Olympus Mons, Latin for Mount Olympus. In real life, the mountain is a volcano, and thus in Space Engineers, it has a large crater on top of it. And I should probably clarify that Olympus Mons is not a volcano in Space Engineers, as those haven't been added to the game yet. In said crater, you can find this, a mysterious black obelisk. And I know what you're thinking, this must be the Stereolith. Wrong. This is the Monolith, obviously. Keep up. Before you ask, yes, this is a reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey, and no, I still haven't seen the film, I'm sorry. The main thing to note about the Monolith is this mysterious writing on the side. On screen here is the full inscription, and as you can hopefully tell, this isn't any human language, so we'll need to translate it into English before we can understand it. I went in depth on my last video on how you translate this to English, but the basic gist is, each character on the Monolith translates directly into an English character. For example, this character here is E, this character is A, this character is T, etc, etc. And eventually you get this translation. A great race has lived on this planet, now they live in the stars. There's a couple of things to point out to go along with this. Remember how I said this character is A? Well, this character here is also A, and these two symbols don't match. That's because this character is a capital letter, and, just like in English, capital letters of this language have different symbols to their lowercase counterparts. Also, during my research into the Monolith, I discovered the font used to create the inscription on the side of it, called Ytterbium 2. Using this font, I can basically write anything in the style of the Monolith's text. For example, this says, "Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel," because of course it does. Speaking of which, we're not far away from hitting 50k subscribers. For 25k, I destroyed an entire planet, so for 50k, I guess we can do something bigger. Anyway, I went more in depth in the last video about this font, but as you can see here, if I change the English text, "A great race has lived on this planet, now they live in the stars," to the font I found, it looks almost identical to the text on the side of the Monolith, pretty much confirming its translation. So, based on the translation of the Monolith, we can presume that in Space Engineers, some sort of civilization lived on Mars and flew away from the planet towards the stars. But, where did they go? That's cool and all, but that doesn't explain what the Stereolith is. Don't worry, we're getting to that. But in order to do that, we need to follow this civilization away from Mars and into the stars, towards this neighbouring planet. But before we get there, let's take a right, as we're actually here to visit the moon. Or more specifically, a moon, as Space Engineers very clearly states that this planet is not the Earth. It's an Earth-like planet. Although the planet we came from is just called Mars and not the Mars-like planet, and it has identical geography to Mars, it's all very confusing. Unless there's an even greater mystery brewing. Speaking of identical geography, just like Mars, this moon has very similar geography to our real-life moon. The Tycho crater on the moon houses a second black obelisk, the Stereolith. A black obelisk in the Tycho crater on the moon? Do you think this could be a reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey? It's called the Stereolith, presumably as a joke about mono and stereo sound. So, don't be surprised if in a future video we start discussing the 5.1 surround lith. Like the Monolith on Mars, the Stereolith has characters inscribed on the side, as shown here. You might have noticed that some of the characters here match some of the ones found on the Monolith. However, a number of them don't. Additionally, if we write out A to Z in our font from earlier, in both capital letters and lowercase, there's a number of characters on the Stereolith that don't directly match. So basically, we have to start from scratch. And this is where the community got stuck for over 8 years. The problem can be easily demonstrated just using the first two words on the Stereolith. If we assign a letter to each unique character in these two words, so for example, the first word would be ABC, and as there are characters in the second word that repeated, the second word becomes CDBB, overall making it ABCCDBB, you might immediately notice a problem. The second character, this L shape, is repeated 3 times, and this TF character is also repeated twice, at the end of the first word and at the beginning of the second. These repeated characters should make it very easy to decipher these two words, and give us a massive head start in solving the cipher. But quite simply, it's impossible. there's simply no words that can be substituted in for the first two words of the Stereolith inscription, or at least no English words. As a British person, I know, cringe, I only speak one language, as A, British people are all ignorant, and B, pretty much the rest of the world speaks our language anyway. So, during my last video, I made the suggestion that the Stereolith translated into another language that isn't English. I alluded to it being Czech, as the developers of Space Engineers are based in Czechia, but that didn't pan out. But, now, before we continue, I need to make an apology. Cue the sad music, the crying, and repeating I'm sorry multiple times, and explaining that I was in a very bad place when I made this mistake. The title of this video is How I Solved the Greatest Mystery in Space Engineers, and I didn't actually solve the mystery. The full credit to the solution goes to Syslok in my Discord. All I did was expose people to the unsolved mystery to hopefully find someone else to solve it. However, I am unfortunately British, and stealing other people's things and claiming them as my own is like 90% of my culture. So basically I solved it. Now, I have checked Syslok's work, and I'm 99% sure he's correct. So let's take a look at it, shall we? If we go back to the first two words on the Stereolith, this L-shaped character here is very similar to this character on the Monolith, which translates to N. This comma-shaped character matches a similar character on the Monolith that translated to A. And this TF-looking symbol is kind of similar to this symbol here, which translated to D. That gives us NDDANN. And I'm sure some non-English speakers will quickly realise that Dan is the German word for then, and from this, we can probably infer that the first word is und, meaning and, giving us und dann, meaning and then. From there, we can start filling in other similar characters between the Monolith and the Stereolith. With a couple of educated guesses, we get, and pardon my pronunciation here, I have the British affliction.
Und dann blickten sie hinunter auf den Garten Eden.
If I type out our German translation using the Monolith font, you can see, whilst it's not identical to the inscription on the Stereolith, it's close enough that I would suggest it is correct. It's likely using a different font from the Monolith, just like it's also using a different Earth language. So, if we're assuming that this is the correct translation of the Stereolith inscription, what does this translate into in English? If we pull up good old Google Translate and input our German text, we get, and then they look down at the Garden of Eden. Based on this translation, I believe that the Stereolith inscription is the second part to the Monolith inscription, making the full translated text, a great race has lived on this planet, now they live in the stars, and then they looked down at the Garden of Eden. Presumably, this means a civilization lived on Mars, and eventually, for whatever reason, its inhabitants flew out into space. They then made their way to the Earth-like planet, a world that was to them a paradise, a veritable Garden of Eden, if you will. From the crater where the Stereolith is found, you can look up and see the Earth-like planet, highly suggesting that this was their Eden. However, this does leave us with a few more questions. Did the civilization mentioned in the inscription create the Monolith and Stereolith? The inscription on the side of both of them is very similar, indicating they were written by the same group of people. Perhaps the difference in the characters could indicate that they were written a long time apart, and that their language changed in the time between, and somehow they became German along the way? Wait, it's all German?
Always has been.
However, just because the same group created both the Monolith and the Stereolith does not mean it was necessarily the inhabitants of Mars. The inscription on both obelisks refers to this group in both the past tense and also the third person, so potentially both of the obelisks were created by a third party recounting their tale. Probably the most important question is, where are these people now? The only races in Space Engineers are the humans that we play as, the wolves that inhabit the Earth-like planet, and the sabroids that can be encountered on the alien planet Ampertam. We know that our Martian friends went to the Earth-like planet, so maybe they evolved into the wolves that now inhabit the Earth-like planet. Maybe Martians aren't little green men. Maybe they are in fact furries. Regardless, the biggest question of them all is, what does this mean for Space Engineers? If you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago, I would have said nothing. But something has changed in the past few weeks. Something very, very interesting. The next update for Space Engineers is adding something called prototech, which I believe is going to be technology that was built by an ancient proto-civilization that inhabited this solar system. And I have no doubts in my mind that this proto-civilization is the one mentioned on both the Monolith and the Stereolith. Everything we currently know about prototech is linked in the video on the top right, and as more details about the next update for Space Engineers are released, and more information about prototech, I will definitely cover them on this channel. So don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see that. A special thanks to the Whisk Man, Hamish Drowner, the Wildcat, Tarantula Fudge, and Somit. If you'd like to support this channel, you can become a YouTube member or a patron with the links below this video.